Tav Mem Tes Samad Aleph, 4 lines from the top at the 2 dots. Bisman Shem Lachin. The Mishnah said at the beginning of the parak, it said that we are not allowed to be timing, you can't insulate when they're moist. Then you cannot be timing, you cannot insulate with them, they're moist of hevel. But when they're dry, it's mutter. So the Gemara has the following shaila: Lachin machmas atzman oy demal lachin machmas davar acher. Is it moist? Is it wet from its own internal moisture or from an outside source? And Rashi explains that if it's machmas atzman, it's moilid hevel, it warms up, it heats up more than if it's wet from an outside source. So that's the shaila. Is it only if it's moist from its own sources, or even from an outside source? It says that you cannot be taimen with the tevin, the straw, the pulp, and the muchin, v'loy ba'asavin, b'zman shehem lach, and not with the pluckings and the grass when they're lachem. If you say that it's wet from an outside source, I can understand how it gets wet from an outside source. But if you tell me that it's from its own source, so I understand asavim, I understand tevin and zagin, it has its own moisture. But but the pluckings from the shearings from the wool from the sheep, where is there that it has its own internal moisture? Moran says yes. We're talking about the wool that's between the thighs. Over there, it has its own perspiration, the moisture from the animal. So that's considered the lachin machmas atzman. In a similar way, he says you can be timed with a ksus and garments which are dry in Paris, but not b'ksus lacha, not with a garment which is wet. So where are you going to get a garment, clothing that has its own internal moisture? Or answer no, similar to we said before, where the wool is from the thighs, between the thighs of the sheep, and that wet wool was spun into cloth and made into a garment, and it still has from that moisture that it had before. That's the lachmas machas asma that it has. So we leave the shaila unresolved, that we don't know is it lachem machmas asman or lachem zachar acher. This is the shaila. Zog the Mishnah, time the biksus over peros bekanfeyina. One can be timed to insulate with a garment, with fruit, with feathers from a pigeon, or a dove, with sawdust from carpenters, and the combings from the flax. When they comb the flax, the impurities that were removed from them, daka, even if it's fine. But Rabbi Yehuda says that daka is also, but it's only mutter if it's coarse of its gasa. Tosfos says that this Mishnah argues with the previous brisa that we had, where Rav Oshia was machalek with a ksus, which is lacha, if it's wet or dry, and over here we make no such distinction. So Tosfos says, therefore, the Mishnah argues with that brisa, and it doesn't machalek with a ksus. There's no chiluk whether it's lacha or yuvesha. Rav Yanai, tefillin tzrichen guf naki keli shebal knafayim. The tefillin has to have a gufnaki, a clean body, just like we find in this following Maisa with Elisha Bal Kanafayim. Maihi, what's this Maisa? Bayomar. Maihi, rather, what is that it has to be naki? To what extent does it have to be naki? Maihi, Abayomar, Shalayafirchmet. He has to be able to control himself, that to know for certain that if he has a sudden urge to be mafiach, that he's able to control himself and not pass wind. So he wears the tefillin to the point where he knows that he will be able to control himself from a sudden urge. Rava Amar Shalai Yishan Behem. Rava says no, he needs to be able to control himself further, certainly Shalai Yafiach, but even if he has a sudden urge to fall asleep, he is overcome by drowsiness, he has to know that he's not so tired and so drowsy that he will not suddenly fall asleep. Sleeping with tefillin is also because perhaps that he will, as Tosfos mentions, perhaps he will be mafiach, perhaps he will, or he will have hesach hadas. So sleeping with the tefillin is also. He has to be wearing the tefillin and when he's in a matzav where he's confident that he's not going to be suddenly doze and fall asleep and doze off. And we're keeping in mind that in those days they wore tefillin the entire day. So a person had to be, whenever he was wearing the tefillin, he had to be in a matzav that he was able to control himself from these sudden urges. And that's one of the reasons that nowadays we don't wear tefillin a whole day, because we cannot control ourselves from this and from hesach hadas for other reasons as well. But Tosfos mentions that's not a reason not to put on tefillin. Of course, a person can be able to be careful for a short period of time. If he's wearing tefillin a whole day, then that's very difficult to be careful for in these circumstances. But for a short period of time, people can be careful and find a situation where they're confident that this will not occur. Why was Elisha called Baal Kanafayim? Shepam Machos goes and Machos Rein Rishon Gzeral Yisrael Shekol Amaniach Tefillin Yinakru Es Meicha. At one time, the Romans, the Rishonim, were going to exert that whoever puts on tefillin, they will smash his skull. V'haya Elisha Menichem, and Elisha defied that gzera, and he put on the tefillin, v'yetzel l'shuk, and he went out to the market, went to the shuk. A certain officer, Roman officer, saw him, so he ran away from him, and the Roman was chasing him. When he came to him, Elisha took it off from his head, put it in his hand. The Roman officer asked him, "What's this in your hand?" They're the wings of a yoina, of a pigeon. He opened his hand, and they were the kanfei yoina. And they were the kanfei yoina. He had this nace. That's why he was called Elisha the Baal Kanafayim, the master of the wings of the yoina. Tosfos said we don't see in this Maisa that he was zohir on guf naki. It says tefillin starts shrichim guf naki kalish bal kanafayim. That he was very, very careful with the tefillin to have a guf naki. Now you don't see anywhere in this Maisa that he had a guf naki. You see that he was meiser nefesh to put on tefillin. But you don't see anywhere here that he had a guf naki. Tosfos says it's mistaber to say that since he had this great nace with the tefillin, that he must have been very zohir, very careful with the mitzvah of tefillin, and it's therefore mistaber to say he must have had a guf naki, otherwise he wouldn't have been zoicha to such a great nace with the tefillin. Tosfos asks, we know that if the Malchus or Rishon is Geizer Gzeira, and they tell us to, the Geizer Gzeira, that we have to wear certain clothing which is like their clothing, or put in certain types of laces which are like their laces, there's a din of Yehareg Val Yaver. If there's a Gzeira against Klal Yisrael from the Goyim, then there's Yehareg Val Yaver. You have to be Meiser Nefesh. So why didn't he leave the tefillin on? Tosfos answers, that's only when there's a Gzeira that we are to be doima to and similar to them. But not putting on tefillin, well, many people don't have tefillin on at any given time. So the fact that he was not wearing tefillin at a certain point in time is not complying with the gzeira to be like the goyim. So therefore, he was not mechuyev to wear the tefillin all the time, to be meiser nefesh to wear the tefillin. However, he was meiser nefesh to that extent that he put it on, and while the Roman was not watching. Why was it over here that he had the nace and it was the kanfei yaina, the wings of the yaina? Why dafka with the kanfei yaina? Mishum dam to Knesset Yisrael yaina, because Knesset Yisrael is compared to a yaina. Shenemar kanfei yaina nechba b'kasa. The wings of a yaina are covered with silver. So therefore, he had the nace with the tefillin when he was saved, and they appeared like the kanfei yaina. Just like the yaina, its wings protected. Rashi says it protects it from the cold, or it fights with its wings. Tosfos says that it is with the yaina. Other birds, when they rest on a rock, they perch on a rock. The yaina, it rests one wing and it flies with the other, and then it takes turns, it alternates. So it always has, its wings are always functioning. As Yisrael mitzvahs meginas aleha, just like the yaina, the wings protected, Yisrael, the mitzvahs protected. So that's why they're nimshal to a yaina, the nace with the yaina. The Magen Avraham says, and that's why the minig is, when we wrap up the tefillin, we wind it up, we do it on two sides. They look like the wings of a yaina. We make it in the form of the wings of a yaina. So the Mishnah said you're allowed to insulate with the sawdust. Rabbi Yehuda and the Sarm shel charoshin koyar shel pishna. Rabbi Yehuda argued, and he said only with gasa, but not with dak. Only if they're coarse, but not fine. Is he referring to the sawdust, or is he referring to the nar shel pishna, komis of the pishna? So Shema, the Tanya Rabbi Yehuda, Amen, Irish shel pishna daka hari kazeva. Rabbi Yehuda says, no, Irish shel pishna daka. He says the fine ones is kazeva. So the shaila was he going to Sarshal Harash and Kai and Sarshal Pishtan Kai? Well, we see over here, he says Narishal Pishtan Daka is like Zeva, which cannot be used for Hatmana. Shmamina, Narishal Pishtan Kai, Shmamina. We see clearly that he is arguing Dafka and the Narishal Pishtan, that they have to be Dafka where they are coarse and not fine. So the Mishnah time and Mishalach and Metaltanaisa. You can use skins, the skin from the animal that was skinned from the animal, you can use it for atmana, and also they're not muksa, metaltanaisam. Independently, separately, halach is that they are not muksa. Begizeit semer ve'en metaltanaisam. You can use gizeit semer, you can use the shearings of the wool, but that is muksa. That is muksa. You cannot be metaltanat. You cannot be metal to them. Kate said, well, if it's muksa, what can you do? Since they're set aside to be woven, to be spun and woven into threads, and they're muksa, now, how do you use it? Practically speaking, it's a davar muksa. How can you insulate with them? You have to take the pot out and put it back. How are you going to use that? So Mishnah says, you take the handle of the lid and hold the handle of the lid that's protruding, and you take it off, and then they fall off on their own. And Rashi says, however, you might have said that would be asur, because you might have thought that the lid should be considered a basis l'davar ha'asur if these shearings are muksa. So the lid, you might have said, is a basis l'davar asur, and then you would not be able to remove the lid. Rashi says, no, the lid is not considered a basis. The function of the lid is to cover the pot. Its function is not to serve as a container or a base or basis for something else. It happens to be that he put the gizet semer on it, but it's inherently not considered a basis because it's not meant to contain or to hold other items. So that's the way you do it. He says, no, you do it a different way. It says, kupa, you take the box that the pot is in, kupa matal sida, and you pick it up and you tilt it over, and it now falls off. Shema yitov enu yochel hachzer, because if you may take the pot, then the shearings might fall in, and you won't be able to put it back. And Chum said you could take it and put it back. So we'll see in the Gemara what is really the issue over here, what is behind what they are discussing and arguing about. So that's to be seen in the Gemara. Yosef Rav Yonasan ben Achinoy, Rav Yonasan ben Elazar, Yosef Rav Chanin bar Chama Gabai v'Kami Boilu. It says that you're allowed to be taimen with the shalach, and they are not muksa with the skins, and they're not muksa. Are we talking shalach shel balabais tanan? Are we talking by a balabais? He's not selling the skins. He's a balabais, yes, and he's going to use these skins for his own personal use. So it's not muksa. He's not going to be selling them. Aval shaluman came the kappa, but by an uman, since he's going to use it for his selling, he's using it for his business. So maybe he's makmid that it shouldn't be used because it might get ruined, and therefore he will not use it for other purposes. It's set aside for his chayra, for his business, and therefore it should be muksa. No, or perhaps it's even an uman, even someone who sells this, and certainly shalabal bias, it's not muksa because he'll use it to rest on. They used to use it as carpets or as mats to lean on, to sit on, to rest on. So perhaps even an uman it's not muksa because even though he has it, he sets aside to sell it, but he will use it for personal use as well from time to time. And certainly a balabayas it's not muksa because he's not even selling it. It's mistaber to say that we're talking about a balabais. Aval shel umen kalpidol. But if it belonged to an umen, he would be makbid, and it would be muksa. He's makbid not to use it, so it shouldn't get ruined, and he wants to sell it, and therefore he's makbid, and it's muksa. Abba Shalach he was an uman. He used to sell the skins. And he said, no, even though he was an uman, he used to say, bring some of the skins, and we will rest on them, and we will use them as mats and rest them. So you see that even in an uman, it's not muksa, because he will use it from time to time.